All right, everyone, we now have to discuss the Pennsylvania election results, and I was absolutely right not to bother giving a prediction about this, and I did that exactly for the reasons that are now all too evident. The race is statistically as close as you can possibly get to an actual tie. There are less than 1,000 votes separating Saccone and Lamb at the moment. Saccone, the Republican, Lamb, the Democrat. Lamb appears to be just enough ahead so that he's going to declare victory, which he has. But after, I think, some more absentee ballots come and it could be closer, there will presumably be a recount. In which case, we don't really know the result. We won't know the result for some time to come. This race, though, was being called a bellwether for what would happen, over the next political years to come. I don't agree with that. I think that's absolutely wrong. Trying to extrapolate one district to the midterms is an asinine feat of stupidity. It doesn't work that way. We saw this with the election the last time around. Just because in a couple of areas it looked like there was going to be a big Hillary Clinton turnout didn't trickle down to the Rust Belt, now did it? And just because Trump did well in the Rust Belt doesn't mean that he magically managed to flip New York City because he happened to be from Manhattan. It just didn't happen. Please do not get into the habit of trying to extrapolate one special election result, which I think in January they have to, They have to redo the whole thing? Can you imagine here? You've got a race this close where less than 1,000 votes have decided a race that ultimately has to be redone in January, I believe, and the whole country's watching it. It's insane. Nobody's even talking about Tillerson or anything. It's like, oh yeah, the Secretary of State's been replaced by the head of the CIA. Yawn, who cares? We're going to look at this one fucking district in Pennsylvania where a couple 100,000 people ultimately are voting and less than 1,000 are going to decide the ultimate result that won't even be long-lasting. A fool's errand. What this tells to me, if you consider this a bellwether, it's a bellwether of political chaos more than anything else. You had Trump showing up exactly once. He would have flipped it to Saccone if he had showed up one more time, but it would have been disastrous for him to do that if Saccone lost. That's what he was worried about, I think. He doesn't want to be very visibly involved in a race and then the person loses, because that's not Trump's idea of a good time. It's not exactly the way he does business. He'll show up once, do his GOP duty, and hope for the best, basically, which is probably the right thing to do, but then it leads to, a situation where there will almost certainly be a recount. As of right now, we don't know who won. Lamb is ahead, presumably has come out on top by a few hundred votes. That's well within recount territory. That's well within the potential for it to actually be the opposite. Maybe Saccone actually won in the voting, but they have to recount everything, and they'll have a different number. Or maybe Lamb gets a few extra hundred votes. Maybe he gets above 1,000. It's to the point where the Libertarian candidate who is involved, their voting share is greater than the margin of victory by a considerable number of hundreds of votes. That's really funny. And last night, I think it was Right Side Broadcasting when I was paying attention, all they could talk about is, I wonder if any of these libertarians wish they could have, because they tend to lean more Republican, I wonder if any of them wish they had voted for Saccone. No, probably not. Saccone not exactly the most symbolic Republican, Lamb not exactly the most symbolic Democrat. They're individuals. By the way, I'd say this, in summation of the whole thing. There's no blue wave, but there's also no red wall. And that's what I'd say on this. The economic situation improving obviously didn't hold all of the Trump-era votes, because Trump won this area by a considerable margin. Saccone's it's 50-50. Saccone being number one, though, we have to say, Trump is exciting. Who knows about Saccone? No, he's not exciting. He's a more standard Republican. Trump whips people up into a frenzy. If Trump goes there and campaigns 3 or 4 times, that's different. You're going to see something different, I think, in the midterms and certainly within 2020. Trump cannot be conflated with other Republicans. But there is no blue wave here. You have the most slim of margins of victory regardless of who wins. So that's not exactly a blowout for the Democrats. It's not what they were hoping for. The last poll showed Lamb up by 3 or 4 points, I think. So this polling was wrong. Again, it oversampled the Democrats. Well, that's also a little bit of a problem. See, that goes back to the bad old days of, hey, everything's oversampling the Democrats, undersampling the Republicans. Trust me, if you look at those polls and you assume that they're true, and you extrapolate that to all the midterm races, the Republicans are way, way further ahead than they otherwise would be. And on the generic ballot, it'd be about even. They'd be ahead in about 3/4 of all the races now at that point, wouldn't they? That has to shock and bother the Democrats slightly to look at the differential within the polling results here. And it was something, we have a lot more polls for this one because everyone thought it would be a bellwether. I don't think of it that way, but a lot of people think so. But for the Republicans, be wary, because there's also no red wall. This is, keep in mind, area where Trump won by a much larger margin, and now you have basically a dead heat within this race. It does show movement in the Democratic direction, but this is the other big but. There's an exception. There's an aside to say here. It appears to be mostly because of enthusiasm. But this is a local election, a local special election, held within one area of one state, one congressional district. The Democrats are much better at canvassing and getting out the vote when you only have to focus on one little area and they can pour national resources in than if they have to wage a midterm battle which involves dozens of races. Or certainly a general election. And we've seen this. Consistently, the Democrats have far less of a problem. They've been targeting one by one these special elections to get better results. That's fine. That's bodes well for them in these special elections going forward. It doesn't have anything to do with the midterms. You know, when the broke DNC has to field dozens of people at once and choose who it's going to defend and who it's sort of got to abandon, it's going to be a little bit different. Meanwhile, Trump and the GOP are flush with money. They can run roughshod over the Democrats. They don't even have to use personal appearances in close races. They can just flood it with ads in some cases, or they can use Trump's bully pulpit on Twitter. Different result entirely. So I would say there's caution here for everyone. The Democrats are complacently congratulating themselves about barely eking out a possible win here that's not even, by the way, yet certain. You're going to have a recount. They're congratulating themselves about that despite the fact that all national focus for the whole DNC was on this one fucking race for so long. It would have been a little bit odd if they hadn't managed to flip it. Meanwhile, the Republicans were being stupid and complacent for the most part. Trump shows up once. Nobody else does anything. Sacconi's basically going it alone. Very little support. Maybe statewide GOP's throwing a few bucks his way. The GOP on a national level didn't give it nearly as much importance as the Democrats. The Democrats are doing this, by the way, for optics. They're trying to create a narrative that the Republicans have gone back into decline, that Trump was a one-off, and now all movement is with the Dems, and just get out and vote. We can do it. We can stop evil Trump. That's what they're trying to create. The Republicans would be dumb not to hammer them in a few of these special elections. They need to craft the narrative. Use the online world. Trump can do this. Create the narrative that a race that you can be assured that you're likely to win by at least a little margin is the new bellwether. That's what you need to do. Break the Democratic narrative. For the Democrats, I would say, if you get complacent, if you start patting yourselves on the back and not looking forward to a midterm in which it's going to be a hell of a lot more messy than any single special election is, you're crazy. You're going to lose heartily. You're going to lose by a huge margin in the midterms if you try to use this as your bellwether. Oh, yeah, it's fine. There was 10 points of movement away from the Republicans and all these. Trump wasn't really involved. He's the exciting Republican. He's going to drag everything up during the midterms. GOP got lazy. You put all of your available money and focus into this one fucking race. That's not a victory in every possible way. Yeah, maybe you end up with Lamb being there until January. Who cares? So don't get complacent. Now, both parties need to look at this very closely and do some analysis. I would say it doesn't really, it's a bellwether of chaos. It doesn't look great for either of them. Yes, there's movement away from the Republicans, but the Democrats had to expend so much manpower and so much money to achieve that result. Can they extrapolate that to the midterms when all the grassroots donations have dried up? Nobody right now is donating in this political climate. They no longer feel inclined to. I think people have realized that corporations bought our elections several times in a row. In the most explicit sense, in 2012, you have literally Goldman Sachs and all these others. They're funding both sides. They're funding Romney and Obama. It became so opaque, and then Clinton comes in, Jeb's involved, you have the dynastic experience. People really, they put their wallets away and said, why should I fund these people? Really, why should I give them any of my money? To the point where Trump was the grassroots candidate, the GOPer. A billionaire from the GOP was the grassroots candidate in the election. Sanders during the primaries, Trump during the general. That's not great for the Democrats. And by the way, you've got an additional problem, which is in 2020 especially, you're going to have one major figure within the party for the Republicans to crucify. You don't have that problem when you're talking about a special election like this. Hillary Clinton saying something stupid doesn't really matter for a race that's ultimately in Pennsylvania. It was really more about money. And as the Trump recovery continues, which it is, and I can believe it will, that's going to eke away a little bit more at Democratic support. The headway that you've gained, you're giving some of that at least back by the midterms, probably more by 2020. The Democrats would be crazy to hedge all their bets on, hey, there's been movement in our direction. Everyone whip yourselves up into a frenzy. We're the Never Trump Party. I don't think that that works for a general election. Special election, okay, maybe you can make that that argument. It's a little bit different now, isn't it, than the midterms when you have to defend, what is it, like 12 Senate seats? And that's just within the Senate. You have to defend a bunch of them. Most of them, the Democrats have to defend. They've got a Democratic incumbent in those seats. Some of them are very vulnerable. The Republicans don't have that problem. They have some incumbents that are up, but they're in safe seats, and they have a couple that they have to really defend. Trump can easily pull that out of his ass. Easily. That's about all. Peace out.